If you could ask God for one thing, what would it be? You may have a number of things that went through your mind. Maybe, we're in the season of asking for gifts and asking for things that we want. And so maybe something came into your mind that's like a material thing where you're like, I really want this thing. I've got this thing that I need for my apartment. I've got this thing that I need for my wardrobe. I've got this thing that I need for work, some accoutrement, some accessory, something, anything really. And you sort of are thinking about that as I'm asking this question. You're like, my life would be a lot better if I just had this one thing. Maybe something like that ran through your mind. Maybe something went through your mind that's more like a virtue or a character trait. I wish that I had something like this. I would be a better person. I'd be a stronger person. I'd be a more gracious person. Or something for the world, like Lydia said, like peace. Maybe you're a really virtuous person like Lydia. You said peace. You said something for other people. If I could ask God for one thing, it would be something that blessed somebody else's life. That's a wonderful thing too. Maybe any number of things went through your mind if you were like, what's the one thing that I can ask God for? And then all of these things, of course, are reasonable. There's almost no ask that is just totally unreasonable in a particular context. There's any number of things that could have gone through your mind that in the right context, the right situation, is a totally reasonable thing to ask for. But I wonder how many of us in that moment, the one thing that went through our mind, if I could ask God for one thing, I could ask Him for one thing and He's definitely going to give it to me. I wonder how many of us thought to ourselves, God, the one thing that I would ask for is you. The one thing that I would ask for is more of you. The reality is that there's not anything that we're going through in life. There's not anything that we lack. There's literally not anything that's going on in our lives that would not be made better by more of God in that thing. Right? Maybe just God's presence would bring something else along with it in the form of grace or provision or mercy or love that would actually minister to us in that thing. But even just God's presence without anything else added to it on its own would turn anything that you're going through into your life into a possible place of peace, of mercy, of salvation, of deliverance, of hope, of joy, of strength, and of any number of things that would be increased in that situation because of the presence of God in your life. There's nothing that we're going through in our lives right now that would not be made better by God entering into that thing. And yet, really, at the end of the day, we have the things in our lives that we desire and that we ask for. And so if we don't have God in a particular situation, if we don't have a particular amount of God in a situation, and if we are lacking in God in our lives, the reality is because we don't desire God as much as we say we do. We don't desire God maybe at all. Jesus says you don't have because you don't ask. There's a correlation between the amount of God that we have in our lives and the amount of asking for God that we do and the amount that we desire God in our lives, because the things that we desire, we often get them and their effects into our lives. How is it that our desires come to run our lives? How is it that desires come to be the things in our lives that motivate us and animate us? And is there a way to get more of God in our lives, even when our desire for Him is lacking? Is there a way to get more of God in our lives even when our desire does not correspond to the amount of God that we wish we had in our lives? These are the questions that we're going to be asking today. Gosh, it's very difficult for me when I'm preaching to not burst out into laughter when I just see my son just toddle through the door. He just goes through the thing that disappears from my line of sight, and then he goes back again over and over, and it's so great. And if anyone out there heard me who's watching me, you can keep doing it. It's a source of joy. But if I'm ever randomly about to burst into laughter, it probably has something to do with that. So you can all just know I'm not laughing at you. We're in the middle of this thing again. We're in the middle of the sermon series titled "No One Cared About This King," whereas we are in the Advent season, which is about the coming of Jesus into the world. We are looking at moments in the Scriptures when people just really couldn't be bothered to pay God any attention. They really couldn't be bothered to stop what they were doing and welcome God and receive Jesus and care about anything that really He was going through, and the ways that He was hurt, the way that He was in pain, the ways that He was rejected. Because we want to learn from these texts to say, I want to bring something different in this Advent season, to be able to welcome God in a way that he wasn't welcome when he was here on earth. Again, the sermon series is titled No One Cared About This King. Our text today is going to be from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 15, verses 6 to 11. If you have a Bible, you can go to that passage. If you have a device, you can pull it up, whatever you would like. I've titled today's sermon, No One Cared That Jesus Died. Again, our scripture today is from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 15, verses 6 to 11. I'll read the text aloud. Now at the feast, Pilate used to release for them one prisoner for whom they asked. And among the rebels in prison who had committed murder in the insurrection, there was a man called Barabbas. The crowd came up and began to ask Pilate to do as he usually did for them. And he answered them, saying, "Do you want me to release for you the King of the Jews?" For he perceived that it was out of envy that the chief priests had delivered Jesus up. But the chief priests stirred up the crowd to have him release for them Barabbas instead. This text is all about our desires. It's all about our desires and how they motivate our action and run our lives, and the reciprocal relationship between the things that we desire and the things that we release into our lives such that they began to run our lives. The whole message of the text is really wrapped up in a particular portion of Mark chapter 15, verse 9, where the text says, "And he answered them," that's Pilate, "saying, 'Do you want me to release for you?'" That right there, we're going to add on the rest of it later, but that right there, "Do you want me to release for you?" Those two words there, want and release, really pull out two major ideas that upon which the whole structure of the text is hanging. One is about desire, and one is about the things that we release into our lives. And we're going to treat each of these in turn. Let's begin by looking at what this text says about desires. This text is all about the desires of the people and the desires of the crowd. The second or third person plural pronoun, them or you, in the dative case, grammar, the dative case, it shows up 4 or 5 times in this passage, meaning that over and over again in this passage, someone is concerned about what they're doing to or for another group of people. The desires, the will of the crowd is the thing that all the action of this passage is revolving around. Over and over again, the actors in this text are acting only out of a concern for what those people want, something for them, something to them. So over and over again, the text is showing us that this is about desire, and in particular, the desires of the people. There's a particular historical context at play here, and we see it in Mark 15, verse 8, when the text says, "And the crowd came up and began to ask Pilate to do as he usually did for them." That language, usually did for them, lets us know that we're seeing in this passage a custom. And in this time, in the first century of the Roman province of Judea, there was a Roman governor named Pilate, Pontius Pilate, who was occupying the nation of Judah. And, of course, the relationship between the occupiers and the occupied people is often strained, full of strife and conflict. It's obvious to imagine why if you just put yourself in their political frame of mind. And so Pilate, around the particular festival, the festival of Passover, as the Roman governor, had a custom of releasing to the Jews one prisoner, in particular a political prisoner, every single year. The Feast of Passover was a feast of deliverance, of remembering God's deliverance and God's release for his people from the oppression of the nation of Egypt. And so Pilate each year would release to them one prisoner and sort of say, "Hey, let's have good relations again. Here's a prisoner, released to you for free." So it was a thing like try to appease the crowd, to sort of ingratiate the Romans and the people that they were occupying. And so what we see here is Pilate engaging in that custom again, saying, "I'm going to release to you a prisoner." And so he asks the people, "What do you want? What do you want? What are your desires?" And there are at least 2 kinds of desires on display in this text, represented by different groups of people. The first kind of desire is the desire that we might use the word lust to describe. And the lust is reflected and represented here by the people. You might hear the word lust and go, "I don't know, that word sounds kind of religious to me or judgy, like, let's talk about lusts, and all lusts are bad." Underneath every lust is just a desire. And desires aren't bad. Desires just are. We just want things in our lives. We wake up to our desires. They're just there. But the language of lust is important because we need certain words desires, stop being things that we want, that we are in control of, and start being something else. Namely, wants that we have that are in control of us. That is a lust. A lust is a desire that's running you, instead of a desire that you are running. And lust, they run our lives when we have them. They're desires that are out of control, such that they are now moving me and animating me. And the people here in this passage are interested in Barabbas and having Barabbas released to them because they have a particular lust, a particular desire that is running them, and it is the desire for the political overthrow of the Romans. This passage talks about Barabbas' involvement in something that the text calls the insurrection in verse 7. Verse 7 again reads, "And among the rebels in prison who had committed murder in the insurrection." You can imagine Rome in this context as an occupying power would have been subject to a number of rebellion efforts and insurrection efforts that the people were trying to engage in over and over again. And there were some people who later would be called zealots. They would be called the Zealot Party. And they were Jews in the first century under Roman occupation whose basic outlook was, we're going to use any means necessary to overthrow the Romans, including political and physical violence. And Barabbas is one of these people. Barabbas is one of these people who says nothing else matters but throwing off the yoke of Roman oppression, and we're going to use any means necessary to do it. And so he's killed somebody, maybe one person, maybe many people, I don't know, but he's a prisoner because in a particular insurrection, a particular uprising, he has murdered people, and the people, their desire to be done, being politically oppressed, is running them such that they're like, yes, we want Barabbas. Now, it's not that that desire is unreasonable or not understandable. Of course it's reasonable for these people to say, I want to be self-governed. It's just who's in control of that desire. Are the people in control of that desire, or is that desire running them? And that desire is running them such that they make a decision in this moment to receive back an insurrectionist instead of receiving Jesus, right? Because everything that Jesus has ever done for the people is so good for them. It's just for their good. He's just healing them. He's teaching them. He's blessing them. He's taking nothing from them. He's only good for them. Whereas Barabbas, while he and his ilk are doing something that's reasonable in its political context, their particular method of dealing with this political issue is going 40 years in the future to cost the people everything. Because about 30, 40 years in the future from this moment, the zealots, Barabbas and his buddies, are going to gain total control over first century Judean politics, and they're going to lead an uprising against the Romans that for a moment is going to be successful, but it's going to be a little bit too successful, such that the Romans are going to be so annoyed by this constant political turmoil that they're going to leave and then come back with a huge army 2 years later and burn everything to the ground. And it's going to be the end of Jewish presence in the Holy Land until the 1940s. Right? So it's actually like Barabbas. And what gets released from Barabbas back into the crowd is going to cost the people everything. Right? They are not in control of this desire for political independence. And so instead of receiving back someone who's only done good for them, they receive someone back into their community that sort of for a moment it seems like it's a good thing, but is ultimately going to fan into flame something that is going to lead to their complete and total destruction. This is what lusts do in our lives. They're desires that run us rather than us running them. And it looks for a moment when we say yes to them like something good is getting injected into my life, but over time, the cost of not being in control of that desire is often incredibly high. What lusts are present in your life? What desires do you have in your life that are out of your control? It could be any number of things. And don't jump in your mind to the lusts that feel like the typical bad religious things. Any desire, even the good ones, even the ones that seem like they're the good ones, once they start to run me and I'm no longer running them, it has become a lust. What desires in your life are running you? Lusts are one kind of desires that we see on display in this passage, but there's a second kind of desire that we see on display in this passage, and it's called envy. At first we hear the word envy, and maybe we think it's something similar to lust, an out-of-control desire. And yes, that's partially true, but envy is slightly different in that envy is a particular kind of desire that only grows up in us when we see someone else having something. Right? And envy is a desire that we didn't know that we had until we watched someone else enjoying the thing. Yeah. That's what envy is, and envy is represented by the chief priests in this passage. Mark 15:10 says, "For Pilate perceived that it was out of envy that the chief priests had delivered Jesus up." When we read this passage, maybe at first we think it's saying, oh, because they didn't like Jesus. Oh, they're envious that they didn't like him. What it means is Jesus had something they wanted, and so they handed him over to the the Romans to be dealt with. And what did Jesus have that they wanted? It could have been a number of things. One thing for sure was the attention of the crowd, the attention of the people that the religious leaders wished they had, that Jesus had. And they looked at Jesus having that thing, and in the moments of watching him enjoy the attention of the crowd, they went, oh yeah, I didn't realize it, but I wanted that thing. And that's what envy always does in us and to us. Right? Humans envy is baked into our nature, right? And you can see it happen in toddler situations. Have you ever seen a bunch of toddlers? I was an early childhood coordinator for a couple of years. I wasn't very good at it, but I wasn't, and I think I was faithful at it, hopefully. And I observed a lot of toddler interactions in the toddler room. And you just see human nature on display in the toddler room. Because in the toddler room, there's a certain set of toys that nobody cares about for a long time. There's a lot of toys in the toddler room, and people are using them, playing with them. People, toddlers. And there's a certain subset of toys that are just kind of boring for whatever reason, like the junk toys, and no one plays with them. Until one child picks one of them up. And then it is the toy. The only toy that exists, basically. The only toy that people care about. Because right away in those just initial moments, you can watch a child picks it up and is enjoying it, and another child looks, and they're not even seeing their desire for the object. They're seeing the whole package of that child enjoying the thing, and they're going, I want that. That's what envy does in us. We have certain desires that we just wake up to in our lives, but envy puts those things on steroids, and then I can wake up whole new desires when we go, not only do I want this thing, but my want for it is exacerbated as I watch you get to enjoy it. That's what envy does in our lives. And there's maybe a little play on words that's present here in the text that tells us something profound about envy, because the Greek word that is used to describe Barabbas as a murderer is the word phanon. Whereas the Greek word that is used to describe the chief priests as people who envy Jesus is phthanon. To murder is phanon, and to envy is phthanon. Maybe a play on words here in this inspired text, letting us know the road to which envy leads. The road of envy, leading to, I will eliminate other people, such that I can be the one who gets to enjoy the thing that they are currently enjoying. Who do you envy? Where are the people in the world when you look around and go oh yeah, when I see that person enjoy that thing, when I see that kind of person enjoy that kind of thing, where does envy live for you? When you all of a sudden go, my desires and my lusts wake up as I watch those other people get to enjoy that thing. You can sort of know if you're having difficulty in this moment going, I don't know, I'm not an envious person. What sorts of good news is it hard for you to hear from other people? When people who are close to you show up and go, this great thing happened to me, what sort of thing might they say that would make you go, dang it, wish that happened to me? That's where envy is for you. It's located right there. What do you envy? Who do you envy? The whole first part of this passage is about desires. What do we want? What do we lust for? What's out of our control? Who do we envy? What do we envy? What are the things that are running us and running our lives? And then those things flip into the second major portion of the text, which is about releasing. How do those things make us release certain things into our lives? And the desires of the crowd, their lusts and their envies, make them release Barabbas back into their communal and social life. And the idea of being released, of releasing something, has at least two important facets to it. The first is that when something is released, it is released from somewhere into something. Right? Barabbas was released from prison back into what? Well, the life of the people. Back into social and communal life. And when things are released into our lives, they're released from the sort of outside, outskirts, in control area of our lives, and they're released into the everyday nature of our lives. What I'm thinking, what I'm experiencing, what I'm feeling, what I'm doing, things get released into something. And when we let things free through our desires, those things are let free into our lives. And once they're let free in there, they have a life of their own. To release something, to set it free, is to acknowledge that once it's been set free, it's going to get to work in the space that I released it into. It's got a life of its own. It's roaming around in there. It's rummaging around. It's doing whatever it wants to do. When we set things free in our lives as a result of our envies and our lust, we're setting like living forces loose in our lives. And it all of a sudden really matters the quality of that force that you've released into your life. And this cycle of desiring things and releasing things into our lives begins to run our life. Really honestly, if we were to just think about this really clearly, we could write a story of our lives that is just the story of what I wanted at a particular moment and what I did to pursue that want. Our whole life could be that story. I wanted that thing back there, and I pursued it for 5 years. 5 years of my choices make sense in relationship to me wanting that thing. Over and over and over and over and over again. And all of a sudden, we look back over many, many years and go, these desires that I'm not always totally in control of explain decades of my life choices. Decades of them. If that's true, then it also stands to reason that over time, there's almost nothing in our lives that we didn't in some way want it to be there. Almost everything. There are some things in our lives that we didn't choose that got injected in, for good or for ill. Most of the things that are present in our lives over a long period of time, we have to look at those honestly and go, those things are there because I keep choosing them. Or I keep choosing to let loose in my life the forces that create those things over and over and over again. Things like chronic instability or constant drama and relational breakdown. Things like chronic dissatisfaction with my life over and over and over again. It's tempting at first to look at those things and go, all of those things would be solved if I could just get a few external things. On the surface, there's a truth to that. But there's a deeper truth underneath it. My relationship to the things that are present in my life is overwhelmingly a relationship of my will, where I am choosing the same things and the same dynamics over and over and over again. My life is almost totally made up of the things that I am choosing to be in. Of course, that also means that we have as much God in our lives as we desire of God. As much of God as there is in my life is a total reproduction of the internal dynamics of my will and my choices. And so how much of God has been released into your life? How much of God has been let loose in your life? How many times in our life have we said, you know what? All other things being equal about whatever's going on in my life, it would be great if there was just more God running around in here. If there was just more God that's been let loose. More God free to wander around and get to work on whatever he wants to. More spheres of my life. Maybe not just moments, but more spheres. If my life is divided into 7 or 8 really key blocks of devotion and passion, more and more of those places have been given over to God. How much of God has been let loose in your life? And if God has not been let loose into our lives, there really is only one thing to conclude. We just really don't desire God all that much. And this brings us to the very pointed moment, the very pointed question of Pilate that is reflected in this text, again in Mark chapter 15, verse 9. And Pilate answered them, saying, "Do you want me to release for you the King of the Jews?" Would you like Jesus to be released into your life? This very peaceful, merciful, kind, loving, courageous, powerful, healer, friend, we reject him. Here's the thing, however, that we miss about the times when we say no to God and the times when we reject God. Our saying no to God is never just some no.
Right.
It's never like a costless rejection. Oh, I don't know. There's not much cost in this equation. I can just say no to God and then moving on. Wonderful. Oh, moving on. Off we go. A no to God, a no to anything, but a no to God is always an exchange. It's always an exchange. It's a no to God so that I can say yes to something else. It's a die to God so that I can say live to something else. It is always an exchange. In Mark 15:11, the text tells us this. The chief priests stirred up the crowd to have Pilate release for them Barabbas instead. And the key word here is instead. There's always an instead when we say no to God. It's always an instead when we say no to anything important in our lives, right? I mean, just like, just so that I'm not just like, running you over with this truth about God. Let's think about it like in important relationships in your life, right? Like the inability to have any kind of healthy work rhythm is never just like a yes to work. It's a yes to work and a no to my loved one who's alone at home. Right? Let's just live in the reality of that for a second. Now, we can have seasons where we work a little bit more, but anything can be done for a season. But chronically over time, an ability to say no to my work always means I'm saying no to something or somebody else instead. And generally, in this workaholic age, that word workaholic is so interesting, isn't it? We sort of use it cheaply. Some people use it proudly, yeah, I'm kind of a workaholic. I care too much. That's right. There's something called an alcoholic who is really struggling under a serious substance use disorder. It's a life-ruining condition. We're using that as a metaphor for my relationship with my work when I say workaholic. Yeah. It's very strange that it would be a marker of pride at all. I'm not against working hard. You should find your God-given vocation and work hard. But I just want to point out, an inability to say no to work means somebody else is eating up all those no's. And it's almost always someone like our spouse or our kids. Almost always. This dynamic is present in our whole lives. It's obviously present in relationship to God. There's always an exchange. There's always an instead. God has said no to so that something else can be said yes to. And whenever we do this in a chronic way, all that we're really revealing is our low view of the thing or the person that keeps eating up our nose. Right? The thing that we have the lowest view of is the thing that we find saying yes easiest to. Right? When we say no to the things where we're like, yeah, I kind of don't care if you're going to be upset by this. I kind of have a low view of you, and so I'm going to keep giving you my negative over and over and over again. And in reality, when we actually take all this on for ourselves, we realize we're no different from the dynamics of the crowd. Right? We read a text like this and we think to ourselves, how on earth could the crowd have said yes to a murderer and no to Jesus? How could the crowd, how could they be so foolish? How could they be so selfish? How could they be so stupid that they would say yes to this, unimportant, whatever, and they would say no to God's Son? And yet you and I are just exhibiting this crowd dynamic in our lives over and over and over again. Right? The reality that's proven to be true in the witness of the Scriptures over and over and over again is that the disobedience and the sin that is the most shocking in the Scriptures is the disobedience and the sin that is the most descriptive of the dynamics that are actually present in my life right now. You and I would have done nothing different if we were present in this moment. We would have said, take him away and give us Barabbas. Because we do it. We're doing it right now in our lives over and over again when we exchange God for literally just about anything else that we lust for or are envious of in our lives. And so nobody cared that Jesus died. And you and I basically don't care. On a daily basis, when we're not thinking, when we're living our lives, that we say live to something else and die to Jesus over and over and over again. sometimes by saying no so we can say yes to God and make space for God. And yet here's the really remarkable thing. Even in this place where our actions reveal to God over and over and over again that we just can barely give him the time of day, Jesus died for you anyways. Jesus died for you anyways. Right? I mean, here's the really wild thing. You can imagine a version of Mark chapter 15 where there's like a version of God that's incarnate in Jesus that really thinks the crowd's going to fight for him in this moment. And then he sees that the crowd doesn't fight for him and he's like, whoa, 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 whoa. Oh, now call the whole thing off. I thought that this was going to like a revelation of my people's strong desire for their God. I didn't think it was going to be a revelation of how little they're thinking about me or how little they care about me and what I'm about to go through. So, never mind, turning the God part of me back on, and I'm just going to light this place up and away we go. Right? You can imagine something like that, but that doesn't happen, which lets you know what? That Jesus purposed to die for people who couldn't give him the time of day. Jesus purposed to die for people who didn't desire him, and that is really, really remarkable news. It's remarkable news that the sacrificial death of Jesus is not built on your desire for God, it's built on God's desire for you. Jesus died for you not because of how much you desire him. He died for you because of how much he desires you. Earlier in the passage, or earlier in the text, in Mark chapter 10, verse 45, Jesus says this about himself. He says, "For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." That language of ransom is a language of what? Exchange. It's a language of swapping places. It's the language of instead. Jesus says, I've shown up to be exchanged for people that I am serving. Not people who I have any expectations of serving me. Not people who are looking out for me. Not person who are desiring me. Not person who are wanting me. People who I am desiring. People who I am serving. That I would be exchanged in their place such that I would die and they would live. Jesus knew that he would be exchanged in this way for careless and uncaring people, and he did it anyways. And in our lack of care for God, our lack of desire for God, at first, when we really sit with that truth, if we would just really let that get all the way in, at first it is just a devastating thing to have to stare in the face. Even the most religious of us, the most church faithful of us, if we would really get down to it, so often what's revealed at the bottom of our heart is just a lack of care and desire for God. And at first, when we see that face to face, it's a source maybe of shame and guilt and burden and lostness and hopelessness, until you realize that it's only once you're down there looking that part of you in the face that you see at the same time a part of the face of God that is hidden from you until that moment. Because it's in the place of you seeing clearly how little you want God that you can finally see clearly how much God wants you. Yeah. Because the reality is that Jesus died for you anyways. He died for you anyways. And if he would do that for you, if he would make such a gesture, if he would give such a sacrifice, if he would give himself up to such brutalization and pain and losses, if he would do all of that, when you don't desire him at all, there must be some other part of the equation at work, and it's God's love and passion for you. And you can only see it when you see at the same time how little you've been longing for God. That place, instead of becoming a place of guilt and shame and religious burden, becomes a place of incredible freedom and levity and grace as I stare face to face into the eyes of the love and desire and longing of God for me, in my weakness, in my shame, in my loneliness. The love of God for me in that place. Jesus died for you because he desires you, not because you desire him. His death is a sign of his great desire for you. His death is a great exchange of his death for your life, and his death is a prisoner release, where because of God's love and mercy working in my life, giving me a purpose, giving me hope, giving me stability, giving me love, I now have something in my life that puts me back, a power that puts me back into control of my desires instead of my desires keeping me imprisoned in my lusts and my envies. And all of this is accessible to people if we would just ask for it. If we would ask. And asking is not the same as desiring. They are related, but praise God, they can be teased apart. And sometimes it is very, very good to be able to see clearly what I should be asking for, even if in a particular moment I don't desire it. Mark chapter 15, verse 6 says this, "Now at the feast he used to release for them a prisoner for whom they asked." The question is who they're going to ask for, not even necessarily who they want. It is good for us to hope that our desires will come into alignment with our ask. We should ask God for that. God can help us do that. More over time in our lives, as we experience more and more the fruits of good asks, our desires will increasingly fall into line. And yet, at the same time, it is possible to have clarity about what I should be asking for, even if I recognize my desire is not all the way there. Desires often feel like they're not in our control, like we just have them. They're out of our power. And so sometimes my desires are for God, sometimes they're not. And if we're just waiting on our desires to map on to God all the time, we're going to be waiting for quite a while before we reach out and seek more of God. And yet it doesn't take completely aligned desires to be able to know when I come to God that I could ask for Him or that I should ask for Him. God can renew our minds such that we ask for Him. We can even build into the language of our ask, God, I do not totally desire you in this moment. My desire, if I'm honest, is for this thing. Yeah. But I know that more of you is actually the thing that would be good for me in this situation. And actually, in the future, I will be glad that in this moment that I asked for you and not this thing that was running my desire. And you should come to God and ask for Him. You should ask for Him because of His great desire for you, because of the great exchange that He made on your behalf, and because asking for God begins to free you from a prison of lust and envy and being run by those things. And it actually gives you back your desires in a form where you can still have the desires that are part of who God made you to be without being run by them. You can have control of them. And so as a result of all of this, we really are just standing in the place of the crowd in this passage. We see in this passage a particular historical manifestation of an eternal dynamic that is happening to all people all the time, where someone stands up in front of us and asks us in a very pointed way, do you want me to release for you the King of the Jews? The question comes to you in the exact same way, with the exact same force as it came to the crowd some 2,000 years ago. It comes to you today. And there are some questions when they come to us where there is no middle agnostic option. There is no fence-straddling option. There's no, I don't know, I'm going to withhold an answer. To withhold an answer is to give an answer of having said no. There are two paths in questions like this. There were two paths for the crowd, and there are two paths for you. What do you want released into your life? Do you want the chronic slavery of lusting and envying to be released in your life from now until the day you are dead? Is that what you actually want? Do you want over time to look backward in your life and go, my life can be accounted for what I desired and how it controlled me for decades and decades and decades at a time? Is that the story you want to tell about yourself when things near the end for you? Our time is really very short. It is very, very short. Our lives are a breath. They're over in the blink of an eye. And you will realize that you will have walked one of two paths when things near the end for you. Do you want to walk one that is slavery? Again, not to desires. Our desires are part of life. Just we need to run them. Right now, they are running you. Do you want to walk a path of slavery? slavery, to your envying, or to your lust, asking for them over and over again? Or do you want to finally, in a deep and foundational way, ask for God and receive, to have let loose and released in your life a power that is loving and gracious and kind, a power that instead of telling you over and over again everything you're lacking, tells you you were made well by God and you are full of any number of good and courageous and strengthening things right now? Do you want to sit under a voice of lack or a voice of encouragement? Which road do you want to walk? Both are open to you. But don't be deceived in thinking that it's anyone's choice but yours. Which road do you want to walk? The question comes to you just as it comes to every single person in the moment of crisis and decision for them. You can walk whichever path you would like, but you should ask for Jesus. Amen.